Welcome to American History Notes, where I discuss the conclusions that I've drawn from studying American history. You may not agree with my conclusions. You probably won't agree with my conclusions or all of them, but you should at least understand or know about the topics that I'm discussing and the people and the events. Have an opinion about them from your studies, not just from a baseless opinion. You want to look at trusted historians that don't seem to have an agenda, and also look at the primary sources, whatever is available to you that they refer to, like letters and journals and newspaper articles and laws, legal documents, things like that, memories, people recollections. Try to put them all together and draw conclusions from them. So we're going to talk about the concept, the idea of liberty in the mind of colonial America, particularly the white people, because the black people were pretty much enslaved and the Indians were excluded. The Native American was excluded um, from the culture in that regard. So this is a concept. Liberty will eventually. The idea is as America evolves, is that liberty is extended to everyone, and everyone who lives here is included in this concept of liberty and freedom. And that's why America has always been a work in progress. The germ of the idea um, only applied to white men at first, and then eventually, as we in blood and toil and sweat and pain and suffering and ideas and expression of ideas and discussion and debate and argument, and through time, liberty has been extended, and we always have to fight for liberty because liberty is something new in the world, and it's something that the world hates and power hates. And so, what happens is you have to constantly be vigilant and constantly strive to protect your liberty and freedom. It is not something that the world is going to just simply say, oh, there you go. We are so kind. We want to make you free. We want you to have freedom and liberty and rights and things like that. The world's not going to do that. It's something that God has given us, and we have to fight for it. And like the famous, legendary Southwestern lawman Alfredo Baca supposedly said, when somebody said that he believed in private property, and he said, yes, as long as you are willing to fight for it. Well, liberty, yes, liberty is a real important thing as long as you're willing to fight for it. So back to talking about my conclusions. The one thing that bound all Englishmen was the belief in the rule of law. The phrase, quote, the liberties of a freeborn Englishman was very important to all. The American leadership was influenced by the writings of Algernon Sidney, Harrington, and Locke, who told every Englishman they should resist any effort by authority to take away any of the liberties that they had acquired throughout history. This liberty could be found in various acts of parliament or when that became too authoritarian in the quote law of nature. George III, a German king of the Hanoverian line, began to attempt to solve all of the vast administrative problems raised by the end of the Seven Years' War outside of existing English law. And this was the crux of the colonists' growing desire to rebel against his authority, not to revolt against the established order, but to maintain rights of self government they had grown to cherish. With the exception of black people in America and Native Americans, British subjects in the colonies were the freest people in the world, even freer in their rights of association and freedom of thought and speech than we are today. They argued and fought not to obtain freedom they did not have, but to confirm freedom they already knew. The American colonies knew more about self government than even the citizens of the mother country. There was little pressure from ancient custom, little traces of feudalism. Land was owned outright, no tithes forcibly collected to support the established church by the mid 1700s in most cases. Maximum wages were not set as in Europe, so the free market was the dominant force, and common laborers were not exploited and victimized by magistrates as in England and Ireland. Americans were exempt from naval press gangs that roamed the English countryside, quote, drafting sailors by force. Some military training was required, but service was voluntary. After the Zenger libel case in New York in 1735, almost complete freedom of speech, press, and assembly were enjoyed. Trades and professions were open to the talented, and no guilds or corporations were exclusive professional associations ruled industry. Morrison says that the hand of government rested lightly on the Americans. For 3 years running, Connecticut levied no taxes except local ones for the improvement of roads and schools. Without established banks, merchants lent money privately, and the frontier was always a place where one could go to escape debt. Social classes existed, but to the British mind, a quote, disgusting equality prevailed. The Indian, quote, menace, too, would have been non existent if the colonists had been content to live east of the Appalachian Mountains. The settled area of 1763, which today probably has over 150 million people, had only 1.5 million then, with 1/3 of them slaves. Most of the population were farmers, but English visitors regarded the entire area wilderness because it was 90% forested. Starting southward, West Florida, defined in 1763 as Old Spanish Florida, west of the Appalachians, along with that part of French Louisiana, including Mobile, Biloxi, and Natchez, was sparsely populated by people of European descent. Pensacola was still only a fort, and Mobile had 112 French people. East Florida had only St. Augustine and St. Mark to show for 2 centuries of Spanish occupation. No white man had yet penetrated the Everglades. The Seminole branch of the Great Creek Nation was the main inhabitants of there. Georgia had a population of about 10,000, with a great many of them being slaves. South Carolina had 100,000 and was very prosperous. The Cherokee under Attakulla, also known as Little Carpenter, had revolted, but he was badly beaten in 1759, with the Cherokee losing a great deal of territory. North Carolina had much fewer slaves, but made up for it with poor white people in the backcountry who revolted in 1769. In Virginia, there was no middle class. If you were white, you were either a, quote, first family or a frontiersman. Progressive or a servant. Progressive planters like Washington substituted wheat for tobacco. For the most part, tobacco was still king. The Church of England was established in every southern colony, but was not greatly influential in any. Maryland was similar to Virginia, although it depended less on tobacco and more on wheat, and had a prosperous seaport. Baltimore, Baltimore, that was the prosperous seaport. It was a natural point for the grinding of grain from Maryland and Pennsylvania. As you moved south through small farms in Delaware, you came to Philadelphia, America's largest city. New Jersey was much like Delaware, dotted with small farms and picturesque villages. New York City was the third largest town in the colonies, already showing signs of its current cosmopolitan reputation, as well as signs of the urban nightmare with high-class merchant homes separated by only a short distance from poor whites and free blacks living in slums. There were already plenty of Irish immigrants and Jews in the town, enough to celebrate St. Patrick's Day and to operate a synagogue. The landed gentry controlled elections, and property qualifications were so strict that not half the white man could vote. This is the fact that undermines my previous statement about the relative freedom of the colonies, but my statement was meant to be in relation to England. A comparison between colonies would show some extremes of freedom, especially with regard to property rights. New England was racially homogenous, with few blacks, Irish, Scots, or Germans, which heavily populated the more southern colonies. 90% belonged to the Congregational Church. New England was also relatively democratic, with almost every adult male having a right to vote, and the inequalities of wealth only being apparent in the prosperous seaports. Seagoing vessels had to pay a duty to the crown when they brought their cargoes into port, and smuggling to avoid such a duty was commonplace, with even Englishmen from the mother country engaged in smuggling. Smuggled tea was England's favorite beverage. Many clergymen were engaged in scientific studies and relating them to the fundamentals of faith rather than, as today, trying to use them to overthrow faith or viewing science as an enemy rather than a witnessing tool. We're going to discuss more about organization and getting prepared for the revolution to come and the break from the mother country, which was inevitable. It didn't just happen in 1776. It was a long process. I'm trying to impose that on you, that it was a long process and a lot of ideas, and the liberties they fought for were things they already had that were being taken away. Okay, so we'll stop there and go on next time. Thank you.